Today we're going to look at a really straightforward 1-4-5 style blues progression, and we're going to specifically look at the 5 chord, moving down to the 4 chord, and then going into the turnaround section. This is a really important part of a blues progression, especially if you're stuck kind of noodling around in minor pentatonic land and you want to play more defined solos that outline the chord changes. So let's get into it. So when I'm practicing playing over a chord progression like a blues, I like to break things down into smaller sections. For instance, I might practice different ideas to play going from the 1 chord to the 4 chord. But today we're going to look specifically at going from the 5 chord down to the 4 chord and then into the turnaround section. So we're in the key of G. So the chords we're talking about here are D7 down to C7. That's the 5 chord down to the 4 chord, and then the turnaround. So to get started, I'm going to show you one of my go-to licks for this section of a blues progression. Then we're going to take this same idea and move it around the fretboard into different positions. But to start out, here's the lick played along to the backing track. I'll play it down, and then we'll talk about what's happening. So the reason I love this phrase so much is that it leans heavily on chord tones to outline the sound of these two different chords. Over the D7 chord, we're leaning heavily on the note D on the 3rd fret of the B string and kind of playing off of that note, right, to drive home the sound of that chord. And we can play different variations on that. We can do, which is D, F, G, A. Or we can play between that A and G, we can play a little chromatic pull-off. Right, we can play different variations on that idea, and I use different ones all the time. But basically the idea is to kind of play a little phrase that's really leaning heavily on the root of that chord to break away from the basic G pentatonic blues stuff and really drive the sound of that D7 into the listener's ear. Then as we go to the C7, we can take this note, this D, and just walk it up chromatically to E, and that gives us the major third of a C7 chord. Right, again, so just targeting a chord tone in a very simple way. And we don't have to, get too deep into outlining the full arpeggio. We're just kind of using these basic chord shapes as a visual guide to see these chord tones. Right, and really all we have to do is hint that one chord tone, and then we can go back into our minor pentatonic kind of blues stuff. Then we have our turnaround lick where, again, I'm just going to play G blues, but land on a D note to outline that final D7 chord at the end of the turnaround before we start the form again. So now we're going to take this basic idea of leaning on the root of the D7 chord and then walking up to the 3rd of the C7 chord. And we're going to move this around the fretboard into a few different positions. Big part of improvising is tying together ideas in different spots on the neck. Depending on where you're coming from and where you're going to, you want to have access to these different ideas all over the fretboard so you can play these things with freedom as they kind of pop into your head. So now what we're going to do is take this same idea, but instead of playing a D here on the 3rd fret of the B string, we're going to play an open D string. So this is going to be a little bit more of an open string type of idea. Right, so I'm going to play this lick example along to the backing track, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's happening. All right, so this lick again starts on an open D string. Kind of plays a similar idea, the same notes we played up here. That little chromatic pull-off, but we're using open strings, so it's got a little bit of a different sound. One of the things I like to do is come pick down by the bridge if I'm playing open string lick. Right, so again, from our open D, we can walk up chromatically and hit chord tones of the C chord. And again, as I'm playing this stuff, I'm just visualizing chord shapes. Right, so D, there's C, and then I can tie that right in with my G blues phrases, G minor pentatonic with some chromatic notes in there, right? Right, that's a little chromatic pull off from D down to C. All right, so let's move this same idea around to another position. Now we're going to move up here to this D on the 5th fret of the A string. We're going to play similar ideas. Again, but this position just lends itself to stretching out in a different part of the neck, right? We have access to different notes playing out of this position and different directions we can go to. So I'm going to play this lick example along to the backing track. So you can see how playing something in this new position opens the door for some different ideas. Now we're in a different spot in the neck. Right, and we've got access to different notes up here. Right, we can stretch this out any way we want to. Right, like I said before, improvising is about tying these ideas together in different ways, and the better you have a handle on the fretboard and where these things are, the more freedom you have to kind of stretch out. All right, so now we're going to move this up to one final position. We're going to play off of this D note on the 7th fret of the G string. And again, we're going to play the same ideas. But this time I'm kind of seeing this D chord, like this D shape, and I'm connecting that together with this C shape, this C bar chord. Right, so right there I can see, visually see that C chord, and I know I've got my chord tones right there. So here's this lick example played along to the backing track. you can embellish these phrases with hammer-ons and pull-offs and chromatic passing tones, little bends and slides. And really, it's up to you to choose how you want to play these phrases. That's part of what's going to give you your own unique voice on the instrument. But moving these phrases around the fretboard and finding them in different positions is a super valuable skill for building up vocabulary and maximizing your vocabulary to make it easier to improvise freely around the fretboard. So if you want to learn these phrases, the tabs and notation are going to be over on my Patreon site. And you can look those over and learn exact fingerings and embellishments that I'm doing when I'm playing this stuff. And then you can take that and run with it and experiment with it on your own. So until next time, happy practicing and take care.